There's something haunting about standing in front of an ancient wall, covered in symbols you can't read. The carvings stare back at you, silent yet somehow urgent, as if they're desperate to tell a story that's been buried for centuries. These aren't just marks on stone, they're the last echoes of people who lived, loved, and dreamed thousands of years before us. And right now, they're waiting for someone to listen. Think about the Rosetta Stone, that unassuming slab of rock that became the key to unlocking an entire civilization. For centuries, Egyptian hieroglyphs were nothing more than pretty pictures until someone realized they were words, ideas, even jokes left behind by people not so different from us. That's the power of these silent testimonies. They don't just give us dates and names, they let us step into the minds of those who came before. A Mayan glyph isn't just a calendar, it's a king boasting about his victories. A Roman inscription isn't just a list, it's a grieving parent's tribute to their child. These artifacts are time machines, and today we're going to learn how to read them. But here's the thing, every scratch on these stones was put there for a reason. Someone took the time to carve these messages, hoping they'd last. Maybe it was a scribe in Mesopotamia pressing wedge-shaped marks into clay, or a craftsman in Angkor Wat chiseling gods into temple walls. They knew their world would change, but they left these clues anyway, clues that now let us piece together empires, religions, even entire ways of thinking that might have vanished forever. So as we explore these inscriptions and reliefs together, remember, you're not just looking at history, you're hearing voices that refuse to be silenced. And by the time we're done, you'll never see a weathered old stone the same way again. There's a reason we're drawn to symbols carved in stone long before we even understand their meaning. They feel like a whisper across time, a direct line to someone who thought their words were important enough to etch into eternity. Take the towering obelisks of ancient Egypt, for example. Covered in hieroglyphs, they weren't just monuments, they were billboards announcing the power of pharaohs to anyone who passed by. Or the delicate cuneiform tablets of Mesopotamia, where merchants recorded transactions in tiny wedge-shaped marks, not realizing they were inventing one of the first writing systems in history. These weren't just practical tools, they were acts of faith, faith that someone someday would care enough to decipher them, and that's what makes these carvings so extraordinary. Unlike fragile scrolls or fading ink, stone endures. Wars, weather, even the rise and fall of empires, these symbols outlast them all. Imagine a Roman soldier carving his name into a barracks wall, never imagining that 2,000 years later, we'd trace our fingers over those very letters, wondering about his life. Or the intricate Maya stelae, where kings immortalized their triumphs in swirling glyphs, certain their legacy would never fade. They were right. These inscriptions are more than records, they're time capsules, preserving not just facts but the emotions, ambitions, and fears of people who lived worlds apart from us. But here's the real magic. These symbols aren't just static relics, they're conversations. When we decode a Viking runestone or piece together a broken Greek inscription, we're not just translating words, we're answering back. That's why a simple graffiti scroll in Pompeii reading, "I was here," can hit us so hard. It's not history, it's a hand reaching out from the past, asking to be remembered. And as we learn to read these messages, we realize something profound. The people who carved them weren't so different from us. They laughed, they bragged, they mourned, and they left their stories in stone, trusting that someday someone would listen. The Rosetta Stone didn't just crack a code, it shattered an entire wall between us and ancient Egypt. Picture this, a slab of dark granite, roughly the size of a coffee table, covered in writing that had baffled scholars for centuries. But what made it extraordinary wasn't just the text itself, it was the way it mirrored the same message in 3 languages, like a linguistic Rosetta Stone. Greek, the language of the rulers; Demotic, the everyday script of the people; and hieroglyphs, the sacred symbols priests used to speak to the gods. For over 1,000 years, hieroglyphs had been a mystery, their meaning lost to time. Then came this stone, a bureaucratic document praising a pharaoh of all things, and suddenly the past began to whisper its secrets. Jean-François Champollion, the French scholar who finally deciphered the hieroglyphs in 1822, didn't just translate words, he unlocked a worldview. Before the Rosetta Stone, hieroglyphs were thought to be purely symbolic, each carving a mystical picture with no connection to spoken language. But Champollion realized something revolutionary. These symbols could also represent sounds, just like our alphabet. That breakthrough didn't just reveal names and dates, it exposed the humor, the poetry, even the gossip of an entire civilization. Imagine reading a 4,000-year-old joke carved into a temple wall or a love poem scribbled on a piece of pottery. That's the intimacy the Rosetta Stone gave us. Yet there's another layer to this story, one that's often overlooked. The decree on the Rosetta Stone wasn't some neutral historical record. It was propaganda carefully crafted to cement Pharaoh Ptolemy V's power. The text praises him for lowering taxes, restoring temples, even crushing rebellions, all to convince the people he was a divine ruler. And here's the twist: by etching this message in 3 scripts, the priests and officials weren't just communicating, they were performing. They were showing off Ptolemy's authority to the Greeks, the Egyptian elite, and the common people all at once. This wasn't just writing, it was political theater in stone. What's haunting is how little has changed. Today, leaders use social media and speeches to shape their legacies. Back then, they used chisels and granite. The Rosetta Stone reminds us that every inscription, every monument is more than a relic. It's a deliberate act of storytelling. And when we read these ancient words, we're not just uncovering history. We're seeing how power has always sought to write its own narrative, hoping to echo across the ages. The real magic of the Rosetta Stone isn't just that it let us read hieroglyphs, it's that it taught us to listen. Hidden in the steamy jungles of Guatemala and Mexico, the Maya built cities of stone that whispered secrets in a language we couldn't understand for centuries. Their glyphs spiral across temple walls and climb the sides of towering stelae like vines, each intricate symbol a piece of a puzzle that took generations to solve. Unlike the Egyptians, who mixed symbols and sounds, the Maya developed a writing system so precise it could capture the rhythm of spoken word, a blend of pictorial symbols representing whole concepts alongside syllabic signs that spelled out names, places, even the sounds of laughter. For decades, scholars assumed these carvings were mere calendars or religious icons. Then, in the 1950s, a Russian linguist named Yuri Norizov made a discovery that changed everything. He realized that Mayan glyphs weren't just pictures, they were syllables, a complex alphabet hiding in plain sight. Take the glyph for jaguar, for example. It wasn't just a drawing of the animal, it could be broken down into the sounds bia, lam, and ha, stitching together the word like phonetic building blocks. Suddenly, those twisting symbols on Palenque's temples began to tell stories not just of kings and battles, but of market disputes, royal gossip, even the boasts of ballplayers who won ritual games. The Temple of Inscriptions at Palenque is like a time capsule carved in stone. Inside, the sarcophagus of King Pakal the Great lies buried beneath hieroglyphs that spiral upward, telling his journey to the underworld. But here's what's extraordinary. This wasn't just a funeral text. The glyphs describe Pakal's rebirth as the maize god, his body sprouting like a cornstalk from the earth, a metaphor so vivid it bridges the gap between death and renewal. The Maya didn't just write history, they wove it into their understanding of the cosmos, where every royal decree and astronomical event was a thread in the fabric of the divine. Yet perhaps the most poignant glyphs aren't the grand royal proclamations, but the humble ones. In the ruins of Tikal, archaeologists found pottery shards scribbled with grocery lists and love notes. One vessel bears the glyphs for chocolate alongside tallies of cacao beans, proof that even 1,000 years ago, people were counting calories and trading treats. Another stone panel recounts a queen's grief after her husband's death, her words etched beside his portrait. The sky fell, the earth trembled. In that moment, the glyphs stop being ancient script and become something universal, a widow's raw sorrow preserved in stone. What's astonishing is how alive this writing system feels. The Maya didn't just carve glyphs, they painted them in vibrant colors on murals, molded them into pottery, even tattooed them onto their skin. At Bonampak, a room of frescoes shows scribes at work, their brushes darting across plaster as they record a battle in real time. You can almost hear the scratch of pigment on wet lime, the murmur of nobles dictating their version of events. Because that's the thing about Mayan glyphs, they weren't just records, they were power. Kings used them to justify their rule, priests to interpret the will of the gods, merchants to tally debts. In a world without paper or printing presses, these symbols were the internet, the history books, and the holy scriptures all rolled into one. And now, as we slowly decode them, we're not just translating words. We're rebuilding a worldview. When a glyph describes Venus as the star that smokes, or a king's accession as the sky-earth tying, we're glimpsing how the Maya saw existence itself, not as linear time, but as cycles within cycles, where the past and future were always present in the carvings. That's why these glyphs still matter. They're not relics, they're conversations, and after centuries of silence, we're finally learning how to reply. High on a sheer cliff face along an ancient trade route in Iran, the Behistun Inscription stares down at travelers like a monument that refuses to be ignored. This isn't just text carved into rock. It's a 400-foot-tall billboard from the Age of Empires, declaring King Darius I's power in 3 languages for all to see. Imagine standing at the base of that cliff in 522 BCE, craning your neck to take in the massive relief of Darius with his foot on the chest of a defeated rebel, the winged symbol of the god Ahura Mazda floating above them. The message couldn't be clearer. This king didn't just rule Persia, he ruled by divine right. What makes Behistun extraordinary isn't just its scale, but its cunning. Like the Rosetta Stone, it was written in Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian, a trilingual masterpiece that would become the key to unlocking cuneiform script centuries later. But where the Rosetta Stone was bureaucratic paperwork elevated by accident to historical treasure, Behistun was designed from the start to dominate. The inscription sprawls across the rock face like a conqueror's manifesto, detailing how Darius crushed 9 rebellions in a single year. One passage even boasts about a rebel leader who had his nose and ears cut off before being displayed in chains, a visceral warning to anyone thinking of challenging the throne. The genius of Behistun lies in its layers of communication. The text doesn't just state facts, it performs them. By repeating the same story in 3 languages, Darius wasn't just ensuring everyone could read it. He was demonstrating his control over the empire's diverse peoples, showing he could speak to Babylonians, Elamites, and Persians in their own tongues. And the relief sculpture transforms words into spectacle. Darius stands larger than life, his enemies groveling beneath him while the god's wings frame the scene like a divine stamp of approval. This wasn't history, it was theater, staged on a cliffside where no one could look away. Yet for all its bravado, Behistun holds a quiet irony. Darius ordered the inscription carved so high on the cliff that it became virtually unreadable from the ground, an intentional move that turned it into more symbol than text. Common travelers couldn't decipher the details. They only saw the towering image of their king triumphant. The real audience wasn't the people passing by, but the gods and future generations who would witness his glory. And in that, Darius succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. 2,500 years later, we're still deciphering his words, still marveling at the audacity of a ruler who turned a mountainside into his personal press release. What resonates most isn't the boasting or the brutality, but the sheer human impulse behind it. Darius wasn't just recording events, he was fighting against time itself, chiseling his version of history into stone where no scribe could alter it. In that way, Behistun isn't so different from a politician's memoir or a CEO's mission statement today. The mediums change, but the urge remains, to control the narrative, to shout down doubters, to insist, this is how it happened. The cliff still stands, the words still cling to the rock, and Darius's voice still echoes across millennia, not because he was right, but because he made sure we'd never stop listening. Deep in the earth of China's Henan province, archaeologists uncovered a treasure more valuable than gold piles of cracked turtle shells and ox bones, their surfaces covered in delicate, angular markings. These aren't just ancient relics, they're conversation starters. Around 3,200 years ago, Shang dynasty rulers would hold these bones over fire until they split with a sharp crack, a sound they believed carried their questions straight to the ancestors. The pattern of the fractures, that was the divine response, meticulously recorded next to the original query in China's earliest known writing. What's astonishing isn't just the spiritual ritual, but what these bones reveal about the birth of Chinese civilization. A typical oracle bone might ask, will the harvest be abundant, or should we attack the neighboring tribe next Tuesday? But look closer and you'll spot something remarkable. Those angular symbols aren't random scratches. They're direct ancestors of modern Chinese characters. The character for rain today looks almost identical to its Shang dynasty counterpart. 4 little dashes beneath a horizontal line, like droplets falling from the sky. That continuity means when a child in Beijing learns to write today, they're tracing symbols first carved into bone over 30 centuries ago. The ritual itself was surprisingly bureaucratic. Scribes would polish the bones smooth, drill hollows into their backs, then inscribe the date, the diviner's name, and the question itself before applying heat. The cracks would race toward the pre-carved hollows, creating predictable patterns that priests interpreted as yes, no, or the ancestors are displeased. Afterward, they'd often carve the actual outcome right beside the prediction. It rained on the 7th day, or the king's toothache worsened. It's history's first feedback loop humanity, documenting not just its hopes, but how often those hopes aligned with reality. But here's what truly chills the spine. Many oracle bones include trial runs. Before asking about war or famine, scribes would test the bone with mundane questions like, will it rain tomorrow? If the prediction failed, they'd discard the shell. That means every surviving bone represents a confirmed hit, a moment when the cracks supposedly told the truth. Whether through skill, luck, or careful editing, the Shang curated an archive where the divine always appeared accurate. Beyond their mystical purpose, these fragments expose the DNA of Chinese governance. The same priests who interpreted cracks also tracked tributary payments, military deployments, and astronomical events. Writing didn't begin here as literature or law, it emerged as a tool for managing uncertainty, for turning chaos into order one crack at a time. Today, when we see a government form or a weather forecast, we're glimpsing echoes of that same impulse, the human need to impose narrative on randomness, to believe that if we ask the right questions in the right way, even the universe might whisper back. The most poignant bones aren't those predicting battles, but personal ones. One shell asks whether the queen's childbirth will go well. Another wonders if a prince's fever will break. In these intimate moments, the Shang rulers seem less like demigods and more like any anxious parent pleading for reassurance. That's the magic of oracle bones. They capture the moment when writing stopped being about the gods and started being about us. Every time we check a horoscope or refresh a news feed, we're still reaching for those same cracks in the universe, hoping they'll spell out answers. The mediums change, but the longing remains, to know the unknowable, even if we have to carve our questions into bone to do it. Long before words took shape, humans were storytellers. The walls of caves and cliffs bear witness to this primal need, not with alphabets or symbols, but with images that pulse with life even after thousands of years. Take the caves of Lascaux, where torchlight flickers across walls alive with charging bison and running horses, their hooves forever suspended in motion. These aren't just drawings, they're frozen moments, a direct line to the minds of people who saw the world not as a place to document, but as a mystery to commune with. What's fascinating is the divide between petroglyphs carved into stone with tools or even bare hands, and pictographs painted with pigments mixed from ochre, charcoal, or crushed minerals. In the American Southwest, the ancestral pueblones left behind sprawling panels of pictographs in shades of red and white, showing hunters with bows drawn alongside spirals that might map the movement of the sun. Meanwhile, in Norway, Viking-era petroglyphs of ships and warriors were chiseled so deep into rock that their outlines catch the light like scars. The methods differ, but the impulse is identical, to say, "We were here," in a language that needs no translation. But were these marks practical or sacred? A hunting scene might seem straightforward until you notice the animals are pierced with arrows in places no hunter would aim, or that their bodies overlap with constellations. Some scholars argue these images were part of shamanic rituals, portals to the spirit world where artists didn't just depict animals but summoned their power. In South Africa, a zigzag pattern carved into stone might record a river's path, or it could be the visual echo of a trance dancer's hallucination, the lines vibrating like the boundary between worlds. Then there's the mystery of repetition. At Petroglyph National Monument in New Mexico, the same spiral appears hundreds of times across miles of rock. Was it a clan symbol, a prayer for rain, or something as simple as an ancient artist's signature, a way to say, "This is mine," in a world without names? The truth might be all of these at once. For indigenous cultures today, these images aren't just artifacts, they're living messages. A Hopi elder might see a petroglyph of a flute player and recognize the Kachina spirit Kokopelli, a bringer of fertility and music, his humped back still telling stories the same way it did 1,000 years ago. What's undeniable is the sheer stubbornness of these marks. In Australia, Aboriginal pictographs have survived monsoons and scorching sun because the artists mixed their pigments with orchid sap, a binder so strong it outlasted empires. In Algeria, a giraffe carved into a sandstone cliff when the Sahara was still green now overlooks endless desert, its neck stretching toward a vanished world. These creators knew their work would endure, but they couldn't have imagined how far we'd travel to stand before their walls, whispering the same question across millennia. What were you trying to tell us? Perhaps the answer lies in what these images lack: Unlike later inscriptions, there are no kings taking credit, no taxes recorded, no borders drawn. Just hands and animals and stars stripped to their essence. That's why a child today can point to a cave painting of a mammoth and feel the same awe as the artist did. These aren't records of power, they're proof of wonder, and in their silence they speak louder than any written word. The seals of the Indus Valley civilization are tiny masterpieces of mystery, each one no larger than a postage stamp, yet packed with symbols that have defied translation for over 4,000 years. Carved from soapstone with a craftsman's precision, these artifacts show animals like unicorns and buffalo standing proudly above rows of cryptic glyphs. But here's what keeps archaeologists awake at night. Are these marks a true writing system or something even stranger? Unlike Egyptian hieroglyphs or Mesopotamian cuneiform, Indus script shows no obvious evolution from simple to complex. The symbols appear fully formed around 2600 BCE, then vanish just as abruptly 600 years later, leaving behind no bilingual texts, no king list, just silence. What makes this puzzle so tantalizing is how normal the Indus civilization seems otherwise. Their cities boasted grid-patterned streets, advanced drainage systems, even uniform brick sizes. These were meticulous planners, people who clearly valued order. So why would such a society invent symbols but never use them to record histories or laws? Some scholars argue the glyphs aren't language at all, but ownership tags like a Bronze Age barcode system for merchants. Others point to the signboard discovered at Dolivera, where 10 large glyphs were mounted above a gateway, suggesting public communication. And then there's the statistical analysis. Computer studies show the symbols follow patterns seen in linguistic systems, with certain glyphs appearing repeatedly like grammatical particles. The debate gets even thornier when you consider the script's possible ties to modern languages. One bold theory suggests the glyphs encode an early form of Dravidian, the language family still spoken in southern India today. In the 1960s, researchers noticed that the frequency of certain Indus symbols matched word patterns in Old Tamil, but without a bilingual text to confirm. It's like trying to solve a crossword puzzle with half the clues missing. Even the direction of writing is contested. Some seals show glyphs reading right to left, others left to right, as if the scribes themselves were experimenting. Perhaps the most haunting aspect is how little the Indus people left behind to help us. Their seals depict scenes of startling vitality. A man meditating beneath a pipal tree, a boat filled with birds, but no captions to explain them. One famous seal shows a horned figure surrounded by animals, dubbed Proto-Shiva by hopeful archaeologists. But is it a god, a priest, or something else entirely? The symbols float around these images like unvoiced thoughts, so close to being understood yet just out of reach. What's at stake isn't just decipherment, but our whole understanding of early urbanization. If these glyphs are language, they'd represent one of humanity's first writing systems, rivaling Sumer and Egypt. But if they're not, they force us to reconsider why some societies develop writing while others thrive without it. Every scratched seal is a whisper from a civilization that mastered weights, measures, and city planning, yet may have chosen to keep their stories in voices that didn't echo beyond their time. Until some lucky excavator unearths the Indus equivalent of the Rosetta Stone, we're left with a paradox, a society advanced enough to carve perfect steatite seals, but perhaps too pragmatic to carve their secrets into history. The Etruscans knew how to make an entrance. Picture this. A lavish banquet hall in 6th century BCE Etruria, where frescoed walls show guests reclining on couches, their names painted beside them in elegant right-to-left script. These weren't just party decorations, They were name tags for the afterlife, ensuring everyone remembered who sat where when the wine flowed. Today, those same names stare back at us from tomb walls and broken pottery, their meanings tantalizingly close yet just out of reach. What's extraordinary about Etruscan script is how much we can read, and how much still eludes us. They borrowed their alphabet from Greek traders, tweaking it into a distinctive angular script. We recognize the letters, even the sounds they represent, but the language itself, that's where the real mystery begins. Unlike Latin, which shares roots with languages across Europe, Etruscan stands alone. A single bilingual Etruscan Phoenician gold plaque found in 1964 gave us a handful of translated words. This gift, to give, like finding a few puzzle pieces without the box lid to guide us. Most inscriptions are frustratingly brief. A typical tomb marker might read, Lathi Felusi clan, aged 45, telling us who but never who they were. Then there's the Zagreb mummy wrappings, a linen book torn into strips to wrap an Egyptian mummy preserved by sheer accident. This 1,200-word text, likely a religious calendar, is the closest thing we have to an Etruscan novel. Yet without context, it's like listening to one side of a phone call, catching phrases about the gods and the 10th month, but missing the story they're telling. Rome's conquest of Etruria adds another layer of irony. The Romans adopted Etruscan engineering, divination, even their togas, but let their language die. By the 1st century CE, Emperor Claudius, who wrote a 20-volume Etruscan history now lost, was one of the last fluent speakers. Today, we're left with echoes. The word persona comes from Etruscan fursu, meaning mask, a testament to their theatrical culture. Even Rome's legendary founding myth Romulus and Remus might have Etruscan roots, with early art showing a shepherd named Rumach near twins. The real tragedy isn't just the untranslated words, but the lost world view they represent. An Etruscan mirror might show a goddess named Tyran, their version of Venus with her name engraved beside her not as a label, but as an invocation. Their bronze liver models used for divination are inscribed with the names of gods governing each section, mapping the cosmos onto an organ. These weren't just artifacts, they were conversations with the divine, frozen mid-sentence. Perhaps that's why Etruscan inscriptions haunt us. They're not just linguistic puzzles, they're the last whispers of a people who taught Rome how to rule, then vanished into their own alphabet. Every time we scan a tomb inscription or piece together a broken vase, we're not just decoding letters, we're trying to hear a voice the Romans themselves let fade, a reminder that even history's winners can't preserve everything they inherited. Runes weren't just letters, they were blades. Each stroke was carved with deliberate force, slicing into wood or stone at sharp angles, as if the act of writing itself was a kind of battle. This wasn't an accident. Unlike the flowing curves of Latin or Greek, runes were designed for hard surfaces, their forms stripped down to the essentials so even a soldier's knife could etch them into a spear shaft or a runestone. But here's what's easily overlooked. These weren't just Viking tools. Runes spread across Germanic Europe centuries before longships dominated the seas, appearing on everything from a Frisian merchant's comb to a Gothic bishop's ring. Take the Rökstone, a 5-ton slab in Sweden covered in over 700 runes. At first glance, it reads like a typical memorial, in memory of Vaymother, his father. But then the text twists into riddles referencing long-dead kings, a wolf who'll devour the sun, and a cryptic line about 9 generations ago. Scholars still debate whether it's a tribute, a prophecy, or some complex magic spell. That's the paradox of runes. They could be as straightforward as a property marker or as layered as a saga. The magic wasn't just symbolic. Archaeological digs have turned up rune-inscribed amulets with phrases like, "Protect me from betrayal," and "no pain shall touch this bone." A 6th century Scandinavian fibula bears a runic love charm that roughly translates to "come to me at night." But the most haunting might be the Lindholm amulet, a bone fragment carved with a chaotic mix of runes and symbols. Was it a prayer, a curse, or a failed alphabet practice? Even the word rune itself whispers of secrecy. It shares roots with the old German runner, meaning whisper, something meant to be heard by gods or spirits, not just mortal eyes. What's striking is how egalitarian runes were. While Mediterranean scribes guarded their ink and parchment, runes belonged to everyone. A farmer might carve them into a tool handle to ward off thieves. A teenage girl in Norway scribbled, "Thorgunn wrote this on a stick, history's oldest known, I was here," and a 9th century trader in Denmark etched his expenses onto a wooden tally, 12 silver coins for wool. These weren't sacred texts, they were the text messages of their day, quick, practical, and deeply personal. Yet runes also shaped empires. The gelling stones in Denmark, commissioned by King Harald Bluetooth, yes, that Bluetooth, declare his conquest of Denmark and Norway alongside his conversion to Christianity, a political billboard in runic script. The younger Futhark, a streamlined runic alphabet, evolved specifically to fit the needs of a mobile Viking age. Its 16 characters efficient enough to carve on a ship's mast or a trader's weight. Even their decline is fascinating. As Christianity spread, runes didn't vanish, they adapted. Medieval Icelandic manuscripts sometimes slipped runic letters into Latin texts like inside jokes, and Baltic farmers used runic almanacs well into the 1800s. The real power of runes lies in their duality. They were democratic yet mystical, everyday yet sacred. A runestone might memorialize a fallen warrior one line and curse grave robbers the next. That tension between the practical and the divine is why runes still captivate us. They remind us that writing was never just about recording words. It was about carving your voice into the world, whether you were a king, a blacksmith, or a love-struck teen with a knife and a piece of birch bark. The story of the Dead Sea Scrolls begins with a Bedouin shepherd tossing a rock into a cave, a simple act that cracked open 2,000 years of silence. What his stone struck wasn't just pottery, but a library of clay jars, each holding leather scrolls so perfectly preserved that when unrolled, the ink still gleamed as if freshly pressed. These weren't just old texts, they were seismic shocks to biblical scholarship, rewriting our understanding of Scripture itself. Consider the Great Isaiah Scroll, its 54 columns of Hebrew script stretching 22 feet long, the oldest complete copy of Isaiah ever found, predating medieval manuscripts by a millennium. At first glance, it matches the book of Isaiah we know today, but the devil's in the details. Tiny variations, a word swapped here, a phrase reordered there, reveal how fluid Scripture was before standardization. One passage describing a suffering servant shows subtle edits that early scribes might have made to align the text with evolving theological ideas. This isn't just a manuscript, it's a snapshot of faith in motion. Yet the real surprises lay in the scrolls no one expected. The War Scroll reads like a divine battle plan, detailing a 40-year conflict between the Sons of Light and Sons of Darkness, complete with angelic cavalry and trumpet signals for attack. Then there's the Temple Scroll, a vision of an ideal Jerusalem so radical it claims to be God's direct dictation, overwriting parts of Deuteronomy. These weren't marginal notes, they were alternate sacred histories, proof that ancient Judaism brimmed with diverse, even competing, interpretations of the divine. What's often overlooked is how mundane some scrolls are. Mixed among the Psalms and prophecies are real estate contracts, marriage records, and even a copper scroll listing 64 hidden treasure sites, none yet found. This wasn't just a monastery's holy library, it was a community archive where the sacred and everyday coexisted. A scrap with scribbled practice exercises shows us how these texts were copied. A master's neat hand at the top, a student's shaky letters below, like a classroom worksheet frozen in time. The genius of their preservation lies in the hostile environment that should have destroyed them. The Dead Sea's arid climate and the cave's stable humidity created a natural time capsule, but the scribes helped too. They processed animal skins into parchment with salts from the lake, making the material resistant to decay. Some scrolls were even coated with honey or alum as primitive preservatives, ancient science shielding sacred words. But why hide them at all? The answer whispers through the so-called Pesher scrolls, which interpret prophecies as coded references to Roman oppression. One commentary on Habakkuk speaks of the Kittim, almost certainly Rome, whose taxes plunder the poor. These weren't just theological debates, they were resistance literature, buried as Roman legions marched toward Jerusalem in 68 CE. When the Qumran community sealed those jars, they weren't just storing texts, they were smuggling faith through the cracks of catastrophe. Today, the scrolls force us to confront a startling truth: the Bible wasn't always fixed. It was a living conversation, etched onto parchment by hands that knew their world was ending. Every time scholars painstakingly reassemble a fragment, like matching a thumbnail-sized scrap of Psalm 22 to its long-lost column, we're not just recovering words. We're hearing a chorus of voices that refused to be silenced, even as empires burned. Standing stones across Ireland and Western Britain bear silent witness to a language carved not in curves, but in angles, straight slashes cutting across the edges of rock like tally marks counting the days of forgotten kings. This is Ogham, a script so perfectly suited to stone it feels less like writing and more like the land itself speaking. Each character is built from 1 to 5 parallel lines branching left, right, or straight across a central stem line, a design so simple a child could scratch it with a knife, yet so distinctive it couldn't be mistaken for any other script. But don't let that simplicity fool you. These carvings are the fingerprints of a culture determined to mark its presence in a world shifting under Roman boots and Christian crosses. What's extraordinary is how Ogham wears its Celtic soul on its sleeve. Unlike the borrowed alphabets of most ancient scripts, Ogham's letters are named for trees: birch beith, alder fern, oak dare, as if the alphabet itself grew from the soil. Scholars still debate whether this connection ran deeper than poetry. Did Druids use these carvings to encode sacred knowledge, their messages hidden in plain sight among memorial stones? Some inscriptions certainly suggest more than meets the eye. The Balacrovane Ogham stone in County Cork stretches over 17 feet tall, its inscription running vertically down the edge like a seam stitching the earth to the sky. The text itself is mundane, son of so and so, but the placement feels ritualistic, as if claiming territory not just for a clan, but for a way of seeing the world. Then there's the mystery of Ogham's origins. Its earliest examples appear suddenly in the 4th century CE, just as Rome's grip on Britain tightened. Was it a resistance alphabet designed to be carved quickly and read discreetly? The theory holds weight. Ogham's linear form is ideal for hurried etching on wood or stone, unlike the flowing curves of Latin script. Or did it evolve from tally systems used to track lunar cycles or livestock? The truth might lie in between. Ogham's structure mirrors the Celtic reverence for boundaries and thresholds. Just as the script clings to the edge of the stone, its users clung to their identity between the rising tide of Rome and the coming wave of Christianity. Most inscriptions are heartbreakingly brief names, patronymics, the occasional ex-son of Y, but in their sparseness they whisper volumes. The Tullicommon stone in County Kerry doesn't just say Maganius. It adds Maci Dexiti, a son of Dexit. That tiny grammatical flourish tells us these weren't just labels, they were flexes. By the 6th century, some stones even mix Ogham with Latin, like bilingual business cards for an elite navigating two worlds. The St. Dogmael stone in Wales goes further, pairing Ogham with a Latin cross, a stone metaphor for a culture in transition. The real magic of Ogham lies in its stubborn persistence. Long after Ireland Christianized, scholars kept the script alive in manuscripts like the 14th century Book of Balamote, which included an Ogham primer. Poets repurposed it as a secret code, crafting verses where the number of strokes per line spelled hidden messages. Even today, modern druids and linguists pore over these carvings, not just to translate names, but to hear the echo of a world where writing wasn't separate from nature, it grew from it, branch by notched branch. Every time we trace those lines with our fingers, we're not just reading a dead script, we're touching the bones of a living tradition. High on the wind-swept plains of central Turkey, a different kind of hieroglyph stares back at us, not the graceful symbols of Egypt, but bold, angular figures marching across stone like an army frozen in mid-stride. These are the Hittite hieroglyphs, a writing system so misunderstood that for centuries, scholars debated whether they were writing at all. Unlike the flowing curves of Egyptian glyphs, Hittite signs are all sharp edges and geometric precision, as if designed to be carved by soldiers rather than scribes. Yet both cultures used the same term for their scripts, sacred carvings. The difference: while Egypt's hieroglyphs whispered to the gods in temple sanctuaries, the Hittites shouted their power from mountaintops. The sprawling rock sanctuary of Yazilikaya is their masterpiece. Here, two open-air chambers cut into limestone ripple with processions of deities, storm gods with curling horns, sun goddesses with wings spread wide, all labeled in crisp hieroglyphs that name each divine figure. But this isn't just a gallery of gods. Look closer and you'll spot the mortal King Tudhaliya IV standing among them, his image and title carved with the same reverence. That's the Hittite genius, blending text and image until politics and religion become inseparable. The message couldn't be clearer. This ruler doesn't just worship the gods, he's their peer. Deciphering these glyphs was a puzzle that took generations to solve. Unlike Hittite cuneiform wedge-shaped script pressed into clay tablets for bureaucratic records, the hieroglyphs were meant to be seen, not filed away. Early archaeologists assumed they were primitive symbols until a 20th century breakthrough revealed their sophistication. Each glyph could represent a syllable, a whole word, or even act as a rebuse where a picture of a foot might mean to go rather than just foot. The longest known inscription, the 30-line karat bilingual from southern Turkey, proved the key. Carved in both Hittite hieroglyphs and Phoenician script around the 8th century BCE, it's the Rosetta Stone of Anatolia, exposing a language that had hidden in plain sight for millennia. What's striking is how these carvings served as Bronze Age propaganda. A Hittite victory treaty wasn't just written, it was performed. The famous Treaty of Kadesh, the world's first surviving peace accord between the Hittites and Egyptians, exists in cuneiform tablets. But the public version, that would have been etched in hieroglyphs on temple walls, a spectacle of diplomacy designed to impress allies and intimidate rivals. Even curses took theatrical form. One inscription warns that anyone who damages the monument will have their name erased like water from a jar, their descendants ground like flour. This wasn't bureaucracy, it was psychological warfare in stone. Yet beneath the imperial bluster, these glyphs preserve intimate moments. A relief at Alokahuruk shows a king embracing his queen, their names carved beside them, a rare glimpse of royal affection. Another depicts musicians playing lutes, their instruments labeled with hieroglyphs that might be the earliest written musical notation. Even the Hittite sense of humor peeks through. One scribe doodled a hieroglyph of a man holding his nose beside a poorly carved sign, as if to say, "This stinks." The real legacy of Hittite hieroglyphs lies in their stubborn refusal to conform. While Egypt's script faded with its empire and cuneiform vanished under Persian rule, Hittite glyphs outlasted their creators by centuries. Neo-Hittite kingdoms kept carving them long after the capital at Hattusa fell, a last stand of cultural identity against Assyrian conquerors. Today, when we trace those angular figures with our fingers, we're not just decoding an alphabet. We're touching the chisel marks of a people who knew the power of words etched in stone, not to hide their history, but to shout it across the ages. The Phaistos Disc sits in its museum case like a dare, a perfect circle of baked clay, smaller than a dinner plate, yet dense with mysteries that have defied solution for over a century. Discovered in 1908 amid the ruins of Crete's Grand Minoan Palace, its surface whirls with 241 symbols, spiraling inward like a hypnotic fingerprint pressed into clay. Animals, plants, human figures, each stamp so crisp it looks fresh from the workshop. But here's what chills the spine. Not a single matching symbol has ever been found elsewhere. No sister inscriptions, no fragmentary clues, just this lone disc whispering in a language we can't decipher. What makes the Phaistos Disc so maddening isn't just its uniqueness, but its craftsmanship. Those symbols weren't carved, they were stamped with individual punches, a technique otherwise unknown in Bronze Age Crete. It's as if someone invented movable type 3,000 years before Gutenberg, used it exactly once, then buried the evidence. Some scholars argue this very precision points to authenticity. Who would forge an object using methods no one had seen before? Others counter that it's too perfect, like a modern artist's idea of what an ancient artifact should look like. The debate rages in academic circles, but most archaeologists lean toward its legitimacy, if only because the disc was found beneath layers of volcanic ash from Thera's catastrophic eruption, sealed in a context nearly impossible to fake. Then there's the script itself. 45 distinct signs repeat in patterns that suggest language, not random decoration. One sequence appears 3 times like a chorus. Could it mean king, gift, or something entirely unexpected? Without a bilingual text or even a fragmentary parallel, every theory is pure speculation. Some propose it's a hymn to a Minoan goddess, the spirals mimicking ritual dance. Others see a mercantile ledger with symbols for olive oil and ships. The wildest guess, an ancient board game where players moved tokens along the spiral path. The truth might be simpler or stranger than we can imagine. The disc's isolation is what haunts us. The Minoans left behind linear tablets by the hundreds, another undeciphered script, but its symbols share nothing with the Phaistos stamps. It's as if the disc fell from another universe, a single page torn from a book we'll never read. Even its purpose eludes us, too fragile for daily use, too small for monumental display. It might have been a diplomatic gift, a priestly oracle, or even a scribe's experimental prototype. The Minoans themselves offer no answers, their palaces burned, their voices silenced by time and invasion. Perhaps that's the disc's real lesson. For all our algorithms and supercomputers, some ancient codes resist cracking not because they're complex, but because we've lost the key to their context. Every time we look at those spiraling symbols, we're not just seeing a puzzle, we're facing the limits of knowledge itself. The Phaistos Disc may never speak, but its silence echoes louder than words. There's something wonderfully subversive about ancient graffiti, the way it cuts through the pomp of history to show us people just like us, scratching their thoughts into walls when no one was looking. Take the backstreets of Pompeii, where the ash of Vesuvius preserved not just grand villas but the cheeky scribbles of regular folks. One tavern wall boasts, "I screwed the barmaid," while another laments, "Lovers are like bees, they live on honey but die from the sting." These aren't the carefully curated words of kings or priests. They're the raw, unfiltered voices of people who never imagined we'd be eavesdropping 2,000 years later. Egypt's Valley of the Kings, that solemn realm of pharaohs, hides similar surprises. Amid the gold and hieroglyphs, Greek and Roman tourists left their marks like ancient TripAdvisor reviews. One particularly unimpressed visitor carved, "I, Ammonios, came and saw the temple and laughed at the idols." Another, standing before a colossal statue, wrote simply, "I can't read this, but I like it." Even the sacred wasn't safe from their irreverence, proof that tourism hasn't changed much over the millennia. What's striking is how universal the impulse seems. From the Roman docks of Ostia to the cliff faces of Petra, people etched shopping lists, curses, even math problems onto walls. A bakery in Herculaneum has tallies of bread orders scored into its plaster, while a brothel in Ephesus features footprints carved into the stone with directions and prices, ancient advertising at its most direct. These weren't acts of vandalism, they were the social media of their day, a way to announce, argue, or just pass the time. The real power of this graffiti lies in its democracy. Formal inscriptions required wealth, status, or political clout, but a sharp nail and a blank wall were available to everyone. A slave in Rome could carve his lover's name just as boldly as a senator commissioned his epitaph. At Hadrian's villa, amid the marble grandeur, someone left a brutally honest review. "I visited and didn't like anything except the sarcophagus." It's a reminder that no matter how carefully rulers sculpt their legacies, the people will always have the last word, even if it's just to complain about the food. Perhaps the most poignant graffiti comes from the quarry at Wadi Hammamat, where Egyptian workers left behind not just their names, but their loneliness. One inscription reads, "The scribe Hori was here, missing his family in Thebes." Another shows a crude drawing of a man holding a child's hand with the words, "Remember me," beneath it. These marks transcend time, turning anonymous laborers into individuals with hopes and heartaches we recognize instantly. That's the magic of ancient graffiti. It doesn't just tell us about history, it lets us hear the laughter, gripes, and whispers of people who are never meant to be remembered. Every scratched complaint about bad wine or declaration of love is a crack in time's wall, proving that the human need to say, "I exist," is older than civilization itself. And when we press our fingers to those faint lines, we're not just observers of the past, we're part of the conversation. The temple walls of Abydos hold many secrets, but few have sparked as much modern fascination as the so-called helicopter hieroglyph. At first glance, it's easy to see why the weathered stone appears to show unmistakable outlines of a helicopter, a submarine, even futuristic aircraft, all carved with the same precision as the surrounding sacred symbols. For decades, these images fueled speculation about ancient astronauts and lost technologies, proving how readily we project our modern world onto the past when faced with the unfamiliar. But the truth is far more fascinating than any conspiracy theory. What visitors are actually seeing is a perfect storm of time and human intervention, a palimpsest where later pharaohs literally rewrote history. When Ramesses II's artisans carved their inscriptions over earlier reliefs from Seti I's reign, they didn't fully erase the original carvings. Over millennia, erosion wore down both layers at different rates, leaving behind a ghostly merger of symbols that only coincidentally resemble modern machines. That helicopter shape, it's actually two separate hieroglyphs, a winged sun disk and a crouching lion blended together by time's invisible hand. This phenomenon isn't unique to Abydos. Throughout Egypt, you can spot similar ghost images where limestone was reused or reinscribed. A temple wall at Karnak shows faint outlines of Amenhotep IV's name beneath later carvings, erased when his religious revolution failed. Even Tutankhamun's famous golden mask may have originally been made for someone else, with subtle tool marks suggesting alterations. What makes the Abydos relief special is how perfectly the overlapping lines trick our pattern-seeking brains into seeing objects from our world rather than theirs. The real lesson here isn't about hidden technologies, it's about the fragility of interpretation. When 19th century explorers first documented these carvings, they lacked the context we have today. Without understanding how palimpsests formed, their confusion was understandable. But in the internet age where sensational claims spread faster than facts, the Abydos helicopter has become a case study in how easily archaeological evidence can be twisted to fit modern narratives. What's often overlooked is how this accident gives us rare insight into Egyptian craftsmanship. The faint traces of original carving reveal how artists planned their compositions, sometimes shifting designs midway. In one section, you can see where a sculptor deepened certain lines to make the newer inscription dominant, an ancient version of Photoshop's layers function. These subtle choices humanize the artisans, showing them not as anonymous craftsmen, but problem solvers adapting to royal demands. Perhaps the greatest irony is that the true story of pharaohs rewriting history, of artisans improvising solutions, is more compelling than any alien theory. The Abydos relief doesn't need spaceships to be extraordinary. Its real magic lies in revealing how even the mightiest civilizations grappled with impermanence. Every time a new visitor gasps at those helicopter-like shapes, they're participating in a tradition as old as the carvings themselves, seeing what we want to see while the stones keep their deeper secrets. Rongorongo glyphs stare up from wooden tablets like scars left by a vanished world, each intricate carving a riddle wrapped in the silence of Easter Island's lost voices. Discovered in the mid-19th century by European missionaries, these tablets covered in crescent-shaped rows of symbols were unlike anything the outsiders had seen. Fishhooks, frigatebirds, human figures with elongated arms. The glyphs seemed to pulse with meaning, yet no living Rapa Nui person could read them. The island's oral traditions had been shattered by slave raids and disease, taking the key to Rongorongo with them. Today, these tablets aren't just artifacts. They're a linguistic crime scene, the only independent writing system ever born in the Pacific, and one of humanity's great unsolved puzzles. What makes Rongorongo extraordinary is its sheer improbability. Easter Island is the most isolated inhabited place on Earth, a speck of land 2,000 miles from the nearest continent. Yet somehow, its people invented a script without contact with literate cultures, a feat achieved only a handful of times in history. The glyphs weren't mere pictographs. They followed strict rules, with signs flipped upside down in alternating rows like a twisted mirror. Some tablets even show corrections where carvers smoothed over mistakes and re-etched lines, proof that every stroke mattered, the most haunting detail. Many tablets are carved from driftwood, as if the islanders were so desperate to preserve their words they scavenged planks from distant shores. Theories about Rongorongo's purpose span the spectrum. Early researchers assumed it recorded genealogy, given Polynesia's obsession with ancestral lines. Others point to the Great Santiago Staff, a 6-foot-long tablet covered in dense glyphs, arguing its rhythmic repetitions resemble creation chants. Then there's the contentious calendar theory that the glyphs track lunar cycles or the migratory patterns of tuna and seabirds. But without a bilingual text or living tradition, every guess is a shot in the dark. Even the name Rongorongo is a mystery. It translates roughly as to recite, to chant, but we don't know if that's what the carvers called it or a label applied later. The tablet's survival is a miracle in itself. Most were burned as pagan curiosities by Christian missionaries, and the few spared were scattered across museums from St. Petersburg to Washington, D.C. One now sits in a Vatican vault, its glyphs whispering secrets to no one. The real tragedy is that we almost had answers. In 1866, a Tahitian bishop named Tapano Jawson interviewed a Rapa Nui man named Matoro Toa, who chanted while tracing the glyphs with his finger. But Jawson, convinced the script was primitive, dismissed Matoro's readings as nonsense. Today, linguists would give anything for those notes. Matoro may have been the last person alive who understood even fragments of the script. What lingers is the eerie parallel between Rongorongo and the island's famed Moai statues. Both were products of a society pushing its limits, creating monuments to outlast time. But where the Moai stand as silent sentinels, the tablets are louder in their silence. They remind us that writing isn't just a tool, it's an act of faith, a bet that someone, someday, will care enough to decipher our stories. The people of Rapa Nui carved their words into wood, never imagining their descendants would forget how to read them. In that way, Rongorongo isn't just a script. It's a message in a bottle washed up on the shore of history, waiting for someone to crack the code. The Voynich Manuscript doesn't just defy translation, it mocks the very idea of being understood. Hidden behind its ornate, looping script and surreal illustrations lies a secret so stubborn that even World War II codebreakers, fresh from cracking Nazi ciphers, threw up their hands in defeat. Unlike ancient inscriptions weathered by time, this 200-page book sits pristine in Yale's Behistun Library, its vellum pages glowing with otherworldly greens and blues, as if the ink was mixed from crushed gemstones. But what pours salt in the wound is how familiar it feels. The handwriting flows like Latin or medieval German. The illustrations mirror herbal manuals of the 15th century, yet every word is nonsense. It's like hearing a song where the melody is perfect, but the lyrics are gibberish. Take the infamous herbal section, where plants twist into shapes no botanist has ever seen. Leaves sprout tendrils like octopus arms, roots coil into Celtic knots, and flowers bloom with geometric precision. Some argue these are encrypted representations of real flora, their features scrambled to protect alchemical secrets. Others see pure fantasy, perhaps the work of a Renaissance charlatan selling knowledge to wealthy patrons. But here's the twist. Advanced statistical analysis reveals the script follows linguistic patterns found in real languages. Word lengths, repetitions, even the way characters cluster, all hint at something deliberate, not random scribbles. It's as if the author took a known grammar and poured it into an alphabet they invented, leaving us with a Rosetta Stone that has no translation. Then there are the naked women, dozens of them, bathing in emerald green pools connected by intricate plumbing, their bodies oddly elongated like reflections in a funhouse mirror. Are these fertility symbols, alchemical diagrams? One theory suggests the entire manuscript is a medieval medical text, with the pools representing bodily fluids in the now debunked humoral theory of medicine. But why encode something so mundane? The most tantalizing clue came in 2019, when a scholar noticed that a tiny scrap of handwriting on one page matched the marginalia of a Jewish doctor from Venice. Suddenly, the script's right-to-left flow made sense. Could it be a phonetic transcription of a Near Eastern language, written in a custom script to disguise its origins? The manuscript's survival is its own miracle. Carbon dated to the early 15th century, it passed through the hands of Holy Roman emperors, Jesuit scholars, and a Polish book dealer named Wilfrid Voynich, who discovered it in an Italian monastery in 1912. Wars, fires, even the Inquisition failed to destroy it, as if the book itself refused to yield its secrets. Today, artificial intelligence scours its pages for patterns, while amateur sleuths pore over every squiggle. Some claim breakthroughs, a deciphered word here, a plant identified there, but the truth remains just out of reach. What makes the Voynich manuscript so haunting isn't just its resistance to decoding. It's the gnawing suspicion that the answer might be ordinary, a trader's ledger, a midwife's notes rendered extraordinary by our inability to read it. Every time a new theory emerges, the manuscript seems to twist away, laughing at our certainty. In that way, it's the perfect metaphor for history itself. We're forever sifting through the fragments, trying to hear voices that may have never intended to speak to us at all. The story of Linear B begins with a fire, not the kind that destroys, but the kind that accidentally immortalizes. When the palaces of Mycenaean Greece burned around 1200 BCE, the heat transformed piles of damp accounting tablets into permanent records, baking mundane lists of sheep and grain into ceramic time capsules. For over 3,000 years, these clay fragments lay buried, their cryptic symbols dismissed as decorative squiggles until one relentless amateur linguist cracked the code and rewrote history. What makes Linear B extraordinary isn't its artistry. The script is utilitarian, a blunt tool for tallying jars of olive oil and chariot wheels, but what it reveals about how writing first took root in Europe. Unlike the grand inscriptions of Egypt or Mesopotamia, these tablets weren't meant to impress gods or future generations. They were Bronze Age spreadsheets, tracking everything from the number of women working in textile workshops to the exact count of sacrificial bulls destined for temple altars. One tablet from Pylos records a startlingly modern complaint. The rowers are absent and the supervisor is not delivering the grain. Even then, bureaucracy came with paperwork. The decipherment in 1952 was a linguistic detective story. For decades, scholars assumed Linear B encoded a lost pre-Greek language until architect-turned-archaeologist Michael Ventris made a radical leap. Noticing repeated word patterns in Cretan tablets, he gambled that the script recorded an early form of Greek, an idea the academic establishment dismissed as fantasy. Then came the breakthrough. Ventris matched symbol clusters to place names like Knossos and Amnizos, proving the Mycenaeans had been Greek speakers all along. The implications were seismic. Suddenly, Homer's epics about Agamemnon and Achilles weren't pure myth but echoes of a real, literate civilization that predated classical Greece by centuries. Yet the real magic lies in the tablet's sheer banality. There are no love poems or battle hymns here, just meticulous inventories that expose the gears of palace economies. We learn that perfumed oil was measured in units called liquid wool, that bronze workers received rations of figs and grain, and that the palace at Knossos kept records on over 80,000 sheep. One fragment lists offerings to deities with the curt efficiency of a grocery list. To Poseidon, 1 bull, 1 cheese, 1 honey. These weren't sacred texts, they were the dry erase boards of their day, meant to be recycled after use. Only the fires that destroyed the palaces saved them from oblivion. What's often overlooked is how these scribes shaped history. Linear B's signs weren't original, they were borrowed from an even older, still undeciphered script called Linear A, used by the Minoans. The Mycenaeans stripped away the mystery, adapting the symbols to tally concrete things, jars, swords, livestock. In doing so, they created Europe's first practical writing system, a tool for power rather than prayer. The tablets even preserve faint finger marks where wet clay was smoothed, reminding us that behind every inventory was a person, likely a palace scribe trained from childhood to turn spoken Greek into rows of angular symbols. The greatest irony, these records of wealth and control outlasted the palaces themselves. When the Mycenaean world collapsed in the 12th century BCE, writing vanished from Greece for 400 years. The next script to appear wouldn't be bureaucratic cuneiform, but the Greek alphabet, a system born not for counting jars but for singing epic poetry. Linear B's legacy isn't just in what it recorded, but in proving how civilizations rise and fall, leaving behind the humblest documents to tell their grandest truth. The Temple of Edfu rises from the Nile's west bank like a sandstone encyclopedia, its walls so densely inscribed they seem to breathe with sacred knowledge. Unlike fragmentary papyri or looted tombs, this Ptolemaic-era sanctuary preserves an entire theological cosmos in perfect detail, from the precise measurements used to lay its foundations to the secret hymns priests whispered before statues of Horus. Walking its halls feels less like visiting ruins and more like stepping into a ritual frozen mid-ceremony, where every column and corridor hums with intention. The genius of Edfu lies in its completeness. While other temples bear selective inscriptions, here the texts form a continuous narrative, as if the architects feared their world's memory might fade and took pains to etch its essence into eternity. What makes these carvings extraordinary isn't just their content, but their context. The building texts near the sanctuary don't merely describe construction, they mythologize it. One relief shows the god Khnum molding the temple's first bricks on a celestial potter's wheel, while another depicts Imhotep, that Imhotep receiving divine blueprints. These aren't dry records, they're origin stories asserting that Edfu wasn't built by human hands alone, but willed into being by gods. Even the quarrying process gets sacred treatment. Inscriptions describe how workers sang to the stones as they were cut, transforming manual labor into liturgy. The temple's outer walls serve as a divine comic book, with sprawling reliefs depicting Horus's epic battles against chaos serpents. But look closer and you'll spot something startling. These aren't generic myths. They are precise parallels to Ptolemaic political struggles, with Horus standing in for the Greek pharaohs who ruled Egypt at the time. The message was clear: just as the falcon god vanquished disorder, so too would the Ptolemies maintain cosmic order. This blending of tradition and propaganda reveals how hieroglyphs weren't just sacred art. They were tools of soft power, shaping perception through symbolism. Perhaps most moving are the daily ritual inscriptions in the inner sanctum. These step-by-step guides, which priests followed for centuries, detail everything from the correct incense to burn at dawn to the exact number of linen bandages for wrapping divine statues. One passage describes the morning ceremony where priests awoke Horus's statue with a chant, "Open your eyes and the darkness is banished." The intimacy of these routines shatters the stereotype of cold, impersonal state religion. Instead, we glimpse a lived faith where rituals were as rhythmic as breathing and every gesture held meaning. Edfu's preservation offers something rare: the chance to experience ancient spirituality spatially. The texts grow more esoteric as you move inward, mirroring an initiate's journey from public spectacle to hidden wisdom. By the time you reach the Holy of Holies, where the walls whisper spells for merging with the divine, you realize this wasn't just a building. It was a machine for transcendence, its inscriptions acting as both script and stage directions for the ultimate performance, bridging heaven and earth. The tragedy lurking beneath Edfu's splendor is that it represents an ending. Completed in 57 BCE, It's one of the last great monuments of traditional Egyptian religion before Rome's shadow fell. Even as its artists carved the final glyphs, the old gods were already receding into history. Yet in their meticulous recording, they achieved a kind of immortality. Today, when sunlight slants through the hypostyle hall, illuminating recipes for sacred ointments or star maps for navigating the afterlife, the stones seem to murmur, "Remember us." And because they wrote it down, we still can. The Antikythera mechanism doesn't just challenge our assumptions about ancient technology, it shatters them. When sponge divers first pulled this corroded bronze lump from a shipwreck off Crete in 1901, no one guessed it would rewrite history. Roughly the size of a shoebox, its surface was encrusted with 2 millennia of marine growth, hiding a labyrinth of interlocking gears more intricate than any clockwork for the next 1,000 years. But the real revelation came when X-rays revealed something even more extraordinary: tiny Greek inscriptions, etched with precision into the metal like whispers from the workshop of Archimedes himself. These weren't decorative flourishes, they were operating instructions for the cosmos. What makes these inscriptions revolutionary is their practicality. Unlike temple carvings meant to awe or royal decrees designed to intimidate, these texts served a purely functional purpose. One fragment reads, "The spiral divided into 235 sections," referring to the Metonic cycle, a 19-year pattern linking lunar phases to solar years. Another label marks the pointer for the position of the sun, proving this wasn't just a philosopher's toy but a working calculator. The language is crisp, technical, devoid of poetic flourish, as if ripped from an engineer's notebook. This was cutting-edge science rendered in bronze, a user manual for the heavens. The mechanism's survival is a minor miracle. The ship carrying it likely sank between 70 and 60 BCE, en route from Rhodes to Rome as war loot. Had it reached its destination, it might have ended up melted down for coins or statues, its genius lost forever. Instead, the sea preserved it just long enough for modern technology to decode its secrets. The inscriptions, though faded, still whisper of its origins. Dialect analysis points to Corinth or Syracuse, Archimedes' hometown, and stylistic clues suggest it wasn't unique. Cicero once wrote of a similar device which showed the motions of the sun, moon, and 5 planets, a description that now seems less like hyperbole and more like a shopping list. But here's what truly staggers the imagination: the mechanism's sophistication. Its gear trains modeled celestial mechanics with near-modern accuracy, accounting for elliptical orbits centuries before Kepler. The inscriptions even corrected for the irregular motion of the moon using a pin and slot mechanism, an ancient algorithm in metal. This wasn't just a calendar, it was a dynamic simulation, a planetarium you could hold in your hands. The Greeks didn't just observe the cosmos, they reverse-engineered it, then wrote the blueprint in microscript on bronze. The cruel irony is that we'll never know how many such devices existed. The Antikythera mechanism survived by pure chance, a single leaf from what was surely a vast library of mechanical texts. Its inscriptions are the last surviving fragments of a technical literature that Aristotle hinted at but which vanished with Alexandria's burning. Every gear tooth, every faded glyph is a taunt, reminding us that the ancient world was far more inventive than we dared imagine. When we peer at those tiny Greek letters through magnifying lenses, we're not just reading instructions, we're eavesdropping on a conversation between humanity and the stars, one that began long before we thought possible. Göbekli Tepe doesn't just rewrite history, it tears up the textbook entirely. Imagine a structure so ancient that when its stones were carved, woolly mammoths still roamed parts of the earth. This sprawling complex in southeastern Turkey, dating back nearly 12,000 years, predates agriculture, metal tools, even pottery. Yet its massive T-shaped pillars, some weighing over 16 tons, stand in precise circles like the bones of some primordial cathedral. And etched into their limestone surfaces are creatures both real and mythical. Scorpions with curled tails, foxes mid-leap, a vulture with wings outstretched as if frozen in the act of swallowing the sun. These aren't random scratches, they're a message we're still struggling to decode. What's startling isn't just the age of these carvings, but their sophistication. The reliefs at Göbekli Tepe aren't crude doodles, they're masterworks of symbolic shorthand. A boar's tusk might curve to mirror the crescent moon, or a snake's body twist into a spiral that echoes patterns found in later Mesopotamian art. Some researchers argue these are clan totems, marking which group built which pillar. Others see something grander, a celestial map, with animals representing constellations as they appeared in the night sky 11 millennia ago. One pillar even shows a series of handbags, a motif that mysteriously appears in Sumerian and Mesoamerican art thousands of years later. Are these shared symbols, or does the human brain just think in similar shapes when reaching for the divine? The real revolution lies in who built this place. Conventional wisdom says monumental architecture requires settled farming societies, yet Göbekli Tepe was crafted by hunter-gatherers. Its existence flips the script on civilization's origins, suggesting that ritual and art didn't emerge from surplus grain, but drove its creation. The carvings might hold clues. Clusters of gazelles and aurochs could depict seasonal migrations, hinting that tracking game led to tracking time. A pillar etched with net-like patterns might record a communal hunt, transforming memory into shared symbol. This wasn't just decoration, it was a cognitive leap, the moment ephemeral thoughts became fixed in stone. But here's the tantalizing question: were these symbols a stepping stone to writing? Unlike later hieroglyphs, Göbekli Tepe's carvings don't form a repeatable code. Yet the consistency in their execution, the way certain animals always face left, or how serpents intertwine in predictable patterns, suggests intentional communication. A pillar's imagery might unfold like a story. A fox gives way to a crane, then to abstract H-shaped symbols, as if narrating a myth or mapping a ritual sequence. It's not writing as we know it, but it's not writing either. Think of it as a prehistoric emoji language, where each creature carries layers of meaning known to initiates. The site's deliberate burial adds another layer of mystery. Around 8000 BCE, someone meticulously filled the entire complex with rubble, preserving it like a time capsule. Was this sacred retirement, or were they hiding knowledge too powerful to leave exposed? When the final stones were laid over Göbekli Tepe's pillars, the builders couldn't have imagined that their symbols would outlast empires, that their foxes and vultures would one day stare back at humans who'd forgotten how to read them. Yet in their silence, these carvings speak volumes. Long before cities or kings, before the first scribe pressed stylus to clay, people were already carving their questions into the skin of the earth. And somehow, across 12,000 years, we still hear the echo. Buried beneath the sun-baked cliffs of Upper Egypt, the Nag Hammadi Library is more than just a collection of ancient books. It's a time capsule of forbidden ideas, sealed in a jar by hands trembling with urgency. Imagine the scene in the 4th century, Roman authorities declaring certain Christian texts heretical, monks hiding stacks of leather-bound codices in clay jars, stuffing them into caves like treasures too dangerous to keep but too precious to destroy. Fast forward 1600 years, and a farmer digging for fertilizer strikes one of those jars with his mattock, unleashing a theological earthquake. Inside weren't just old manuscripts, they were ghost gospels, voices from a Christianity that nearly was. What makes these Coptic texts so revolutionary isn't just their survival, but their subversion. Take the Gospel of Thomas, a collection of Jesus' sayings that reads like spiritual riddles. The kingdom of God is inside you and outside you. When you know yourselves, then you will be known. No miracles, no crucifixion, just cryptic wisdom urging followers to seek divine sparks within themselves. This wasn't the Jesus of Roman-approved orthodoxy. This was a mystical teacher whose true message, the Gnostics claimed, had been hidden from the masses and reserved for the enlightened few. The inscriptions practically thrum with urgency, as if the scribes knew their time was running out. The physicality of these codices tells its own story. Unlike the smooth vellum of later Bibles, these were made from papyrus, stitched together with flax thread, and coated with carbon black ink that still gleams in places. Some pages bear fingerprints in the margins where readers traced particularly potent passages. One codex, the Gospel of Philip, even includes a scribble in the margin, a later reader's exasperated note complaining about smudged ink. These aren't sterile relics, they're living documents handled by real people who debated, doubted, and risked persecution to preserve them. Burial was their salvation. While Orthodox texts were copied and edited by generations of monks, these Gnostic writings were frozen in time, escaping the slow drift of doctrinal revision. The difference is stark. Compare the Nag Hammadi version of the Apocryphon of John with fragments found elsewhere. The Orthodox copies soften the Gnostic belief in a flawed creator God, scrubbing away the edges that made the text dangerous. The jar preserved not just words but worldview, a reminder that history's losers often leave the most unfiltered records. Yet the real power of Nag Hammadi lies in its incompleteness. Many codices are fragmentary, their pages eaten by insects or crumbled at the edges, leaving sentences trailing into silence. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene breaks off just as she shares a vision of the soul's ascent, a cruel tease as if the past itself is whispering, "This much I'll show you, but no further." These gaps force us to confront how much we've lost. For every text found at Nag Hammadi, how many more burned in bishops' bonfires or molded in unmarked graves? The library's rediscovery in 1945 didn't just add to Christian history, it fractured it. Suddenly, the heretics had a voice, and what they said upended centuries of assumptions. Jesus wasn't just a savior, he was a teacher of secrets. Salvation didn't require a church, it required self-knowledge. These inscriptions, scratched onto papyrus by hands that expected oblivion, challenge us to reconsider who gets to define truth. The Gnostics lost the battle for orthodoxy, but their jars outlasted empires. In the end, the desert didn't preserve their faith, it preserved their questions. And sometimes the questions are more dangerous than the answers. The Dresden Codex isn't just a book. It's a cosmic clock, its bark paper pages unfolding like the wings of a sacred bird to reveal a universe governed by precise, repeating rhythms. Imagine holding this fragile artifact from the 13th century, its vibrant red and black glyphs still glowing despite the centuries, each stroke a testament to Mayan scribes who painted the heavens with the same care as they charted them. Unlike the static carvings on temple walls, this codex was meant to be handled. Its 74 accordion-folded pages flipping to track Venus's dance across the sky or warn of impending eclipses. The very material speaks volumes. Amate paper made from beaten fig bark, coated with a layer of lime plaster so smooth it could hold the finest brushstrokes. This wasn't just a record, it was a working tool as practical as a modern astronomer's telescope and as sacred as a priest's holy text. What sets the Dresden Codex apart is its staggering accuracy. One table tracks Venus's 584-day cycle with an error margin of just 2 hours over 5 centuries. Another predicts solar eclipses with a precision European astronomers wouldn't match until the Renaissance. But here's the twist: these weren't cold calculations. The Mayans saw celestial events as conversations between gods, and the Codex is full of ritual instructions: when to plant crops, when to wage war, even when to bleed oneself as an offering to keep the cosmic balance. A page showing the rain god chalk pouring water from jars isn't just art. It's a celestial weather forecast linking specific planetary alignments to seasonal rains. The scribes didn't separate science from spirituality. To them, the stars were divine and math was the language of prayer. The Codex's survival is a minor miracle. When Spanish Bishop Diego de Landa ordered the burning of Mayan books in the 1560s, he destroyed thousands, convinced they were works of the devil. The Dresden Codex only escaped because some anonymous collector, perhaps a curious conquistador or a sympathetic friar, smuggled it to Europe, where it eventually gathered dust in a German library. For centuries, scholars dismissed its glyphs as primitive drawings until 20th century breakthroughs revealed their true genius. The irony is bitter. A text meant to guide Mayan priests through sacred time ended up preserved by the very culture that tried to erase its worldview. Today, the Codex's most haunting pages aren't its celestial charts, but its warnings. A sequence known as the serpent numbers depicts a cosmic serpent disgorging torrents of water, flanked by glyphs forecasting destruction. Some researchers believe this records a historical flood. Others see a prophecy of cyclical apocalypses. Either way, the message is clear. The Mayans understood their place in a vast, rhythmic universe where humans weren't masters but participants in a divine equation. The real tragedy is how much we've lost. The Dresden Codex is one of just 4 surviving Mayan books, a tiny fraction of what once existed. Imagine the libraries that burned, the star catalogs reduced to ash. Yet this lone survivor still whispers secrets across 8 centuries, proving that indigenous science wasn't just sophisticated, it was visionary. Every time an astronomer today calculates a Venus transit or an eclipse path, they're walking in footsteps the Dresden Codex mapped long before telescopes existed. The pages may be fragile, but the knowledge they hold is unbreakable. The sandstone corridors of Angkor Wat hum with whispered hymns, not from living voices, but from the thousands of inscriptions carved into every surface. These aren't mere decorations, they're the architectural equivalent of a sacred mantra, repeating until stone becomes scripture. Walk the gallery of bas-reliefs, and you'll spot Sanskrit verses praising Vishnu alongside Khmer accounts of royal elephant hunts, a deliberate blurring of divine and mortal realms. One pivotal inscription near the western entrance declares, "The king is not a mere administrator, but a fragment of Vishnu himself." This wasn't hyperbole. By etching such words into the temple's bones, Khmer rulers like Suryavarman II didn't just build monuments, they engineered theology. Look closer at the devatas, those serene female deities lining the walls. Each is framed by tiny Khmer captions naming them as bearers of the king's merit, effectively turning celestial beings into cosmic notaries attesting to the ruler's virtue. Even the measurements of the temple encode sacred geometry. The central tower's height matches the length of the surrounding moat's western bridge, a physical manifestation of the Hindu concept that earthly structures should mirror celestial proportions. The inscriptions don't just describe this harmony, they activate it, serving as ritual blueprints for priests who once paced these corridors chanting from the carved texts. But the true genius lies in the bilingual strategy. Sanskrit, the language of the gods, dominates cosmological passages and deity invocations, while old Khmer details tax exemptions for temple workers and land disputes resolved by royal decree. This linguistic duality created a feedback loop. The Sanskrit verses lent divine legitimacy to Khmer governance, while the vernacular texts grounded that divinity in tangible benefits for the people. A particularly revealing slab near the library buildings records the king gifting 5,000 temple workers with silver rings and rice, a performative act of generosity immortalized in script, ensuring future generations would remember both the gift and the giver's piety. The most haunting texts aren't the grand proclamations, but the personal ones. Hidden in a narrow passageway, a 12th century inscription by a court poet reads, "The dust of the king's sandals is the pollen of the lotus of heaven." At first glance, it's flattery, but in context, it's revolutionary, the idea that even a monarch's footprints could become sacred relics. This poetic hyperbole was made literal in ritual practice, where servants reportedly collected dust from the king's path for use in blessings. The stones of Angkor didn't just record beliefs, they shaped them, turning metaphor into state doctrine with every chisel stroke. What's often overlooked is how these inscriptions functioned as legal contracts with eternity. When a text declares that the temple's foundation deposits include 7 layers of diamond, gold, and pearls, it's not just boasting, it's creating a divine insurance policy. Future rulers who dared renovate the structure would risk violating these sacred inventories, a deterrent as potent as any army. The inscriptions even encode time itself. Pillars marking solar alignments bear text specifying the exact minute the equinox sun should illuminate the king's statue, a celestial validation of his rule, written in sunlight and stone. Yet for all their grandeur, these carvings nearly met silence. The jungle's reclaiming of Angkor in the 15th century left many inscriptions buried under roots and lichen until 19th century scholars painstakingly recorded them. Today, when monsoon rains slide down a stele, washing centuries of grime from a Sanskrit verb or a Khmer numeral, it's as if the temple is speaking again, not just about gods and kings, but about the human hands that carved each letter, believing their words would outlast empires. And against all odds, they were right. From the Rosetta Stone's bureaucratic decree to the Rongorongo tablet's silent poetry, these ancient marks are more than records, they're bridges. Each one is a hand reaching through the darkness, not just saying, "We were here," but whispering, "This is how it felt." The Rosetta Stone gave us pharaonic tax policies. The Behistun Inscription boasted of severed ears and divine favor. The Mayan glyphs preserved royal ballgame scores alongside prophecies of rain, while Viking runestones mixed shopping lists with pleas to Odin. The contrast is staggering. Some inscriptions were meant to echo through millennia, like Darius's mountainside manifesto. Others, Pompey's tavern graffiti, a Shang diviners scribbled, "Will it rain tomorrow?" were never meant to survive, yet here they are, turning casual words into accidental immortality. What unites them isn't just the urge to communicate, but the raw humanity behind it. The Etruscan gold plaque with its bilingual gift mirrors today's tourist souvenirs. The Hittite scribes' doodled complaint about poor carving could be a modern worker's text message. Even the Phaistos Disc, that maddening outlier, feels familiar, a lone inventor's prototype lost before it found its audience. These creators weren't so different from us. They fretted over spelling errors, exaggerated their boss's achievements, and sometimes just carved, "I was here," because they could. The mediums change clay, bone, temple walls, but the impulse doesn't. Yet for every voice we've recovered, countless others have faded. The Indus Valley seals spin their untold stories. The Voynich Manuscript guards its herbal secrets. Linear A's economic tablets wait for their ventris, while the Rongorongo chants drift further from memory with each generation. Decipherment isn't just solving puzzles, it's restoring dignity, returning names to the nameless. When Michael Ventris proved Linear B was Greek, he didn't just crack a code, he resurrected Mycenaean tax collectors and chariot repairmen from 3,000 years of silence. That's why these fragments matter. They're not artifacts behind glass, but invitations. The next time you pass a monument, a memorial plaque, even a street sign, remember, you're walking through a conversation that began when the first human pressed a finger into wet clay. Writing was never just about information, it's about defiance, a refusal to vanish, and the story isn't over. The tags on subway trains, the tweets preserved in archives, the laser-etched messages on spacecraft, they're all part of the same chain, stretching forward as surely as it reaches back. So keep looking closely. The past isn't done speaking, and who knows, maybe one day your words will be the ones someone strains to hear across the centuries. If you've enjoyed unraveling these mysteries with us, hit subscribe. We're just getting started. Now it's your turn. If you could sit down with any ancient scribe, carver, or graffiti artist, whose story would you want them to tell? Drop your pick in the comments and let's keep the conversation going. After all, that's what these voices have been waiting for, someone, finally, to